Let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever been disrespected so casually, so effortlessly, that it didn't just hurt your feelings, but actually rewired your soul? I'm not talking about shouting. I'm not talking about insults thrown in anger. I'm talking about that quiet, confident disrespect, the kind people deliver when they're absolutely certain you won't do anything about it. Yeah, that kind. Because that's exactly what happened to me that night. Picture this: a fancy restaurant, low lighting, soft music humming in the background, linen napkins folded like origami. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices because they assume everyone at the table is doing just fine. Spoiler alert, they weren't, I was. I walked in at exactly 6 o'clock on the dot because some of us were raised to believe that being late is a form of disrespect. I wore a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, and pearls around my neck. Those pearls were a gift from my late husband, Frank. He gave them to me back when we still believed love automatically earned loyalty. Guess I missed the memo that said otherwise. The hostess led me through the dining room. We passed laughter, clinking glasses, carefully curated smiles that looked warm from a distance but hollow up close. And then I saw them, my son David. His wife Jessica, my two grandchildren. They were already seated, arranged perfectly, like a family portrait, the kind you frame for social media, the kind that cracks apart the moment the camera is gone. David stood up halfway when he saw me, not fully, just enough to show effort. He gave me that half hug, you know, the one, the I'm hugging you because society expects it hug. Hey, Mom, he said, you made it, made it. Like this dinner was optional, like I wasn't partially responsible for the mortgage that made nights like this possible, but I smiled anyway, because women my age were trained to do exactly that: smile, swallow, survive. Jessica barely looked at me. She lifted her wine glass and took a slow sip, as if gratitude were something she was mildly allergic to. I had been her mother-in-law for 15 years, and she still treated me like a pop-up she couldn't close. Everything felt tense but manageable until it wasn't. Jessica's sister Karen arrived late, loudly of course, dragging in her entire highlight reel behind her. Husband, twins, private schools, Disney vacations. Subtle bragging disguised as casual conversation. The whole "we're winning at life" starter pack. Jessica soaked it up. Comparison has always been her favorite sport. Then, without warning, Jessica clapped her hands together and said, "Girls, why don't you all sit together over there?" She pointed toward me, and that's when my granddaughter K.H. Lowe looked me straight in the face. 8 years old, big eyes, no hesitation, and she said it clear as day, "You can't sit with us. Mom said you're an old burden." Boom, no dramatic pause. No music cue, just silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Then came the laughter, not loud laughter, worse. That uncomfortable, nervous chuckle people do when they know something is wrong, but they don't want to be the one who acknowledges it. Karen laughed, her husband laughed, Jessica smirked, and my son laughed the loudest. That was the moment something inside me cracked clean in half, not slowly, not gently. Snap. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't cause a scene. I stood up, I placed my napkin neatly on the table. My hands were steady, my heart was absolutely wrecked. "Well," I said calmly, "I suppose I won't burden anyone with my presence anymore." David waved his hand dismissively, like I was being dramatic. "Mom, she's just being silly." Silly? No, that wasn't silly. That was rehearsed. That was an 8-year-old repeating grown folk venom she'd heard at home. I looked him straight in the eye. "Is she being silly?" I asked, "or is she repeating what she hears when I'm not around?" Silence. Jessica stopped smirking. David stopped laughing. Too late. I picked up my purse and walked out, not stormed, not rushed. I walked out with the kind of dignity that only comes when you finally realize you've been played for years. And as I drove home alone that night, something clicked. This wasn't about one comment. This was about who they thought I was. And trust me, they were about to find out how wrong they'd been. But what happened after I left that restaurant? Oh no, that's when the real story started. Let me tell you something most people don't realize until it's too late. People will show you exactly who they are the moment they believe they still control you. That night, the same night I walked out of that restaurant with my dignity stitched together by sheer will, I went home, took off my pearls, placed them carefully on the dresser, and sat in silence. No crying, no dramatic breakdown, just the quiet hum of realization settling into my bones. Around 11:07 p.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I already knew: David. Not an apology, not a "Mom, are you okay?" Not even the bare minimum fake concern people use when they know they messed up. Just this: "Payment still due tomorrow." That was it. No greeting, no acknowledgement of what happened. No shame, just money. That text hit harder than the insult at dinner ever could, because in that moment the truth finally stood up and introduced itself. To them, I wasn't mom, I wasn't grandma, I wasn't family, I was a line item. An ATM with a pulse, someone whose feelings were inconvenient but whose bank account was essential. For 2 years, 2 full years, I had been quietly carrying them. Mortgage payments, $2,000 every single month. Emergencies, surprises, school tuition gaps, vacation loans that were never repaid. I covered it all, and after everything, I was an old burden. I stared at the screen for a long time, long enough to notice how calm I felt. Not angry, not shocked, just clear, so I typed back 4 words: figure it out. I hit send, turned my phone off, and went to bed. Let me tell you something: nobody prepares you for the first time you say no after a lifetime of being used. It feels like oxygen. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, chaos: 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, voicemails stacking up like unpaid bills. I didn't rush. I made coffee, fed my cat. Sat down with toast and strawberry jam like it was just another Tuesday, because for the first time in years, their panic wasn't my emergency. Mom, please call. There's been a misunderstanding. We didn't mean it like that. Then my personal favorite, KH Low is really upset, typed by Jessica, obviously. Oh, now she's upset. The mortgage was due at 3 o'clock p.m., and without my payment, they were short. I knew that because I'd been quietly reviewing their finances for months, not because I didn't trust them, but because deep down I think I already knew. Funny how fast family turns into desperate when the free ride stops. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't jump, I didn't rush, I already knew who it was. David stood on my porch looking exactly like he did at 16, the day he got caught lying about where he'd been. Sweaty, nervous, trying very hard to look confident. Mom, he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. What's going on? You didn't send the payment. No, I replied pleasantly. I didn't, he blinked. The payment is due today. I'm aware. You've been making it for 2 years. Yes, I said calmly. 24 payments, $48,000. His face changed. We had never said the number out loud before. We need that money, he said, voice tightening. I sat down in Frank's old chair, the same one he used to read the paper in every morning. People who call me a burden, I said evenly, don't get my money anymore. She didn't mean it like that. Oh, I think she meant it exactly like that, I replied. And I think you agreed, considering how funny you found it, he sighed, rubbing his forehead. Mom, let's not do this right now, just call the bank. And that's when it hit me. He really believed I had no spine, that I'd fold. That I always would, so I leaned forward and spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure every word landed. David, listen carefully. I will never make another mortgage payment for you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Silence. You can't be serious, completely. We'll lose the house. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before letting your daughter humiliate me. He tried everything after that, pleading, bargaining, even subtle threats dressed up as concern. None of it worked because once you finally see manipulation clearly, it stops working. But he didn't stop there. Oh no, what he tried next was so calculated, so cruel, it changed everything. You would think that losing free money would humble someone, slow them down, make them reflect, force a little accountability. No, for my son, it did the opposite. It made him reckless. It made him desperate. And worst of all, it made him dangerous. The calls didn't stop after that morning. They multiplied, voicemails dripping with guilt, text messages pretending to be concerned. Long-winded explanations that somehow always circled back to the same point: fix this. When that didn't work, the tactics shifted. Suddenly, family friends were checking in. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years started asking if I was feeling okay. Church acquaintances left messages about family unity and forgiveness. I recognized it instantly. A smear campaign wrapped in polite language. 4 weeks passed, long enough for me to understand something clearly. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about pressure. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang, unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. Mrs. Sullivan, a man's voice asked. Yes, this is Robert Martinez. I'm an attorney representing your son, David Sullivan, in a legal matter involving you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I'm sorry, I said, still half chuckling. Involving me? Yes, ma'am, your son is filing for conservatorship. Let that sink in. My own child, the boy I raised, protected, sacrificed for, was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my money. According to the attorney, David claimed I was confused, emotionally unstable, erratic in my decision-making, unable to responsibly manage my finances. Translation: I stopped paying him. That was the moment the final puzzle piece snapped into place. This had never been about the mortgage. This had never been about family. This was about control. When I hung up the phone, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat down in Frank's old chair and laughed until tears ran down my face, not because it was funny, but because the irony was unbearable. After everything I'd done, after every sacrifice, he thought I was weak. He thought I was isolated. He thought I was the kind of woman no one would believe. And that was his biggest mistake, because I wasn't confused, I wasn't fragile, and I certainly wasn't alone. What David didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that I had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. I had records, bank statements, wire transfers, emails asking for help, texts thanking me for saving them again. every mortgage payment, every emergency expense, every so-called loan documented. I had kept everything not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Frank always told me paper trails protect you when people don't. The next morning, I hired the best family law firm in the city. Not a favor, not a recommendation, the best. When I told the attorney my story, she didn't interrupt once. She listened. She reviewed the documents. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and said words that sent chills through my spine. "Mrs. Sullivan, this isn't conservatorship." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked me dead in the eye. "This is elder financial abuse." That was the moment the rules changed, because suddenly I wasn't defending myself. I was exposing them. My lawyer explained it clearly, attempting to seize control of an elderly parent's finances after financial support is withdrawn. That's a red flag. Coaching a child to demean a grandparent, that's psychological abuse. Trying to weaponize the legal system to regain access to money, that's exploitation. David didn't just cross a line, he bulldozed it. And the irony, the conservatorship filing he thought would scare me into compliance, it became evidence. Evidence that he believed I was nothing more than a resource to be harvested. When the papers arrived at my door, I didn't panic. I smiled, because now everything was on record, and once something like this enters the legal system, it doesn't disappear quietly, it leaves a trail. Court dates were scheduled, depositions loomed, and for the first time in his life, my son was about to be held accountable not by me, but by a system that doesn't care about guilt trips or family titles. You see, I spent years playing defense, explaining, excusing, enduring, but the moment David tried to legally steal my independence, that's when I stopped being polite, that's when I stopped protecting him. That's when I stopped being afraid of being the bad mother, because there is nothing worse than raising a child who believes you exist to be used, and nothing more dangerous to that belief than a woman who's finally done being silent. And trust me, the fallout, oh, it was just beginning. Let me tell you something important, something you only learn the hard way. When a lawyer stops smiling, you should start paying attention. I sat across from Sarah Blackwood with my hands folded neatly in my lap. My posture was calm, composed, the way women of my generation were taught to present themselves no matter what was happening inside. But my heart was racing like it knew something life-altering was coming. Sarah Blackwood wasn't just a family law attorney, she was the family law attorney. The kind of woman judges listen to, the kind who doesn't bluff, doesn't posture, and never wastes words. She calculates. Her office was quiet, clean. Sharp lines, no clutter, the kind of space that tells you everything inside it is intentional, including the woman sitting across from you. "Take your time," she said, so I did. I told her everything. The mortgage payments every month without fail, the emergencies, the tuition gaps, the quiet expectations, then the dinner, the low lights, the linen napkins. The way my granddaughter looked at me and said the words that changed everything. "You're an old burden." I told her about the laughter, about my son laughing the loudest. Then the text, "Payment still due tomorrow?" No apology, no shame, just entitlement. And finally, the moment that made my stomach tight even now, the conservatorship threat. My own son trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my money. Sarah didn't interrupt once, she didn't react. Didn't tilt her head, didn't soften her expression. She just listened. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands together, and then she said a sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. "Mrs. Sullivan, this isn't about your mental capacity." She paused. "This is elder financial abuse." Boom, not yelled, not dramatized, just facts. She slid a yellow legal pad across the table toward me. "Your son feels entitled to your money," she continued calmly. "When the money stopped, he escalated. That's textbook abuse behavior." I felt something drop in my stomach, but it wasn't fear, it was clarity. All those moments I'd brushed off, all the guilt I'd swallowed, all the excuses I'd made for him, they lined up suddenly, neat and undeniable. "So he can't actually win this?" I asked quietly. Sarah looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Oh, he can try," she said, "but conservatorship isn't a feeling, it's a legal standard." She began ticking points off on her fingers. He would need medical records, independent evaluations, documented cognitive decline, proof you are unable to manage your own affairs. She met my eyes, and from what I'm seeing, you're sharper now than most people half your age. Then she smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile predators get when they realize they're no longer the hunter. "We don't just defend you," she said evenly. "We counterattack." That was the moment something shifted inside me. I hadn't come here to fight my son. I had come here to protect myself. But Sarah saw something I hadn't fully accepted yet. David didn't just misjudge me emotionally, he misjudged me strategically. She laid out the plan with surgical precision, full medical evaluations, physical, cognitive, psychological, a complete financial audit, every dollar I had transferred to them, documentation, texts, voicemails, timelines. and recordings legally obtained under single-party consent laws. You document everything, she said firmly, because people like your son talk when they think they're winning, and she was right. Once David believed the court was on his side, he talked a lot. Calls became careless, texts became bold, threats became casual. He didn't realize every word was becoming evidence. I walked out of that office holding a folder that weighed more than paper ever should. Inside, it wasn't just documents, it was truth. And somewhere between the elevator ride down and the front door opening to the street, I understood something that changed me forever. I wasn't being punished for saying no. I was being punished for no longer being controllable. And when those recordings finally played in a courtroom, let's just say somebody's carefully constructed image didn't survive the sound of their own voice. Court day came faster than I expected. No dramatic countdown, no slow build, just a date on the calendar that carried the weight of everything my life had been reduced to: lies, entitlement, and a son who believed the law would do what guilt no longer could. That morning I got dressed slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I was deliberate. Charcoal gray suit, clean lines, no jewelry except my wedding ring, Frank's briefcase in my hand, inside it 3 years of receipts. Medical records, bank statements, text messages, timelines, truth neatly organized. I walked into the courthouse with my head up and my back straight, not defiant, not angry, prepared. David arrived 10 minutes later with Jessica beside him and a lawyer who looked barely old enough to rent a car. Fresh suit, polished shoes, nervous eyes. He avoided looking at me. Jessica didn't. She stared like I had betrayed her. Judge Patricia Wells took the bench exactly at 9 a.m. No wasted motion. No pleasantries, sharp eyes, calm voice, zero tolerance for nonsense. David's attorney went first. He painted a picture that almost impressed me with its creativity. I was described as a grieving widow, emotionally fragile, confused, prone to irrational financial decisions. Apparently, saying no now qualified as dementia. He spoke about concerns, about changes in behavior, about my withdrawal of financial support as evidence of decline. The judge listened, unmoved. Then Sarah stood up, and the temperature in the room changed. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't posture, she dismantled. "Your Honor," she began, "we will start with medical facts." She submitted my evaluations first. Physical health, excellent. Neurological screening, normal. Cognitive testing, perfect scores. Executive function, above average for my age. Judge Wells raised an eyebrow, then Sarah moved to finances. "Over the last 24 months," she said calmly, "Mrs. Sullivan transferred over $60,000 to the petitioners." She paused just long enough for it to sink in. "This included mortgage payments, emergency expenses, tuition assistance, and direct cash transfers." The judge leaned forward slightly, and then Sarah said the words that cracked the case wide open. "Financial support ceased only after Mrs. Sullivan was publicly demeaned and labeled an old burden by a minor child, language learned from adults." Silence, absolute silence. Then came the recordings. Sarah pressed play. David's voice filled the courtroom. "If you don't give us the money, I'll make sure the court forces you to." My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from finality. Then Jessica's voice came through speakerphone, laughing. "Once we get control, we can just funnel the money. She won't even know." Someone in the gallery gasped. Judge Wells slowly leaned forward, hands folded. "Mr. Sullivan," she said evenly, "would you like to explain why your wife refers to your mother as the old bat while discussing financial exploitation?" David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His lawyer shifted in his seat. The judge didn't wait. "This court does not exist to weaponize family dynamics for financial gain," she said firmly. "Nor will it tolerate abuse disguised as concern." She looked directly at David. "Petition for conservatorship is denied." Gavel. "One additional matter," she continued. "This case is hereby referred for investigation into potential elder financial abuse." Second gavel. That was it. Game over. Outside the courtroom, everything unraveled. Jessica started shouting at David, at Sarah, at anyone within range. David slammed his fist against the wall and blamed everyone but himself. Their attorney quietly stepped back, physically distancing himself like he didn't recognize them anymore. Sarah leaned toward me and spoke softly. "They didn't just lose access to your money," she said. "They lost credibility, permanently." I nodded. I thought it was over. I thought the law had finished its work. But desperation doesn't end in courtrooms. It mutates. Because when people lose legally, they often try something even worse. You'd think losing in court would be the bottom. You'd think public humiliation, legal consequences, and the words "elder abuse investigation" hanging over your head would force someone to stop. But desperation doesn't make people better. It makes them reckless. 3 weeks after the court ruling, exactly 3, I learned just how far my son was willing to go. It was 6:04 a.m. when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Maggie," my neighbor whispered urgently, "there's a U-Haul in David's driveway." That alone told me everything. I got out of bed and walked to the front window, boxes everywhere, furniture stacked haphazardly, car doors slamming. And then I saw them, Tyler and K.H. Lowe, sitting on the front steps with backpacks too big for their shoulders. No jackets, no breakfast, no parents beside them, just waiting. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt even in the courtroom. A few seconds later, my phone rang again. David, I answered. Mom, he said too quickly, we're moving Phoenix, better opportunities. I didn't respond right away. I was watching my grandchildren rub sleep from their eyes. Funny, I said finally, voice calm, looks more like running. Silence. Then he cleared his throat. About the kids, they're staying with you. My heart stopped. You didn't ask, I said slowly. We already told them, he replied. They're excited. I looked back at the children. Tyler was staring at the ground. K.H. Lowe was holding her backpack like it was a life vest. They weren't excited. They were terrified. Before I could respond, Jessica appeared on my doorstep. Mascara streaked, hair unbrushed, crying hard enough to look convincing but not hard enough to be genuine. We can't take them right now, she sobbed. We'll be sleeping on my sister's couch. It's not fair to drag the kids into that. Translation, they were saving themselves and dumping the consequences on me. I took a deep breath. I will not enable child abandonment, I said evenly. Jessica froze, then came the guilt. They need their grandmother. Family sticks together. What kind of person turns away her own grandchildren? I listened, then I spoke. The kind who understands that children are not luggage you leave behind when life gets inconvenient. David exploded. You owe us, he shouted over speakerphone. This is your fault. If you hadn't cut us off, I ended the call. Then I did something that changed everything. I called Child Protective Services, not emotionally, not angrily, professionally. I reported exactly what I was seeing. 2 minors left without guardians, parents fleeing the state. No legal custody transfer, no consent, no safety plan. Within an hour, the street filled with official cars, clipboards, questions, consequences. David and Jessica returned furious. They shouted, they accused me of betrayal. They cried in front of the social workers like actors missing their cue. It didn't matter. Paperwork doesn't care about tears. By evening, the decision was made. Tyler and K.H. Lowe were placed into emergency foster care. David and Jessica left town that night without their children. I stood in my kitchen long after the house went quiet. I cried, not because I doubted my decision, but because it should never have been mine to make. Here's the truth people don't like to talk about. Love without boundaries becomes permission. And children raised by parents who refuse accountability pay the highest price. I could have taken them in. Everyone expected me to. But that would have protected David again. It would have told the system that abandoning your kids has no consequences as long as grandma picks up the pieces. I refused to lie, not even with kindness. 3 days later, I got a call. A call that made everything click. Mrs. Sullivan, the investigator said, we uncovered evidence that your son attempted to transfer assets into an offshore account shortly before the conservatorship filing. I closed my eyes. That's when I understood something chilling. The court case, the threats, the kids, none of it was impulsive. It was planned. My son wasn't just entitled, he was dangerous. And the man I raised, he was gone. And what I learned next, about what he tried to hide, finally explained everything. Let me tell you something no parent is ever prepared for. Nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the moment you realize your own child isn't just lost, he's dangerous. It was early morning, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Soft light came through the kitchen window, stretching across the counter in pale gold lines. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes for myself, not for company, not for comfort, just for routine, something normal, something grounding. The radio played low in the background. The coffee was already cooling in my mug. It felt like an ordinary day. And then my phone rang, unknown number. Normally, I let those go to voicemail. But something in my chest tightened, a quiet instinct I've learned to trust. I answered. Mrs. Sullivan? A woman asked. Yes, this is Maria Santos from Child Protective Services. My hand stilled. The spatula hovered midair. In 1 second, the room felt smaller. I wanted to update you on David and Jessica. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I'm listening, I said, though my voice had already changed. There was a pause, not long, but deliberate. The kind professionals take when they know they're about to alter someone's reality. They've been arrested. The word landed hard, arrested. I felt it more than I heard it. I'm sorry, I said automatically, like my brain hadn't caught up yet. Arrested for what? Another pause. Then she said it. Grand theft. Interstate transport of stolen construction equipment. Fraud. The room tilted, not dramatically, but enough to make me grip the edge of the table. She kept talking, but my mind lagged behind her words, struggling to stack them into something that made sense. They were stopped in Las Vegas, she continued. Their vehicle was loaded with stolen machinery, serial numbers altered. False documentation, Las Vegas. Phoenix had been a lie. The move wasn't opportunity, it was escape. I pressed my fingers against my forehead, trying to steady myself. and then she said the sentence that turned my stomach inside out. Based on financial records, Maria continued carefully, a portion of the stolen operation appears to have been funded by your mortgage payments. Boom, it wasn't loud, it didn't echo, it just clicked, every missing dollar. Every vague explanation, every sudden emergency, the slow business, the mysterious expenses, the money that evaporated faster than it should have. I hadn't been helping my son survive. I had been financing crime. My stomach rolled. Not because I was afraid of what this meant for me, but because I finally understood the depth of the deception. I'd been played methodically, comfortably, without hesitation, and the most painful part. He never hesitated because he never saw me as a risk, only a resource. Maria's voice softened. I know this is a lot, Mrs. Sullivan. I swallowed. How long? I asked quietly. Years, she replied. Our investigation suggests at least five years, while I worried about his stress, while I defended him to friends, while I told myself every parent helps their child. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in silence while the pancakes burned on the stove. Here's something no one tells you about betrayal like this. It doesn't come with rage first, it comes with grief. Grief for the version of your child you believed existed. Grief for the memories you now question. Grief for the trust you can never rebuild. I thought about Frank, about what he would have said, about how many times he warned me not to rescue David from consequences. And for the first time, I understood what Frank meant. Love without limits doesn't protect a child. It teaches them they're untouchable. I cleaned the pan, poured the coffee down the sink, and sat back at the table. Because deep down, I knew something else was coming. When the truth cracks open this wide, it never stops at the surface. And I was right, because what I learned next about my grandchildren changed everything. There are moments in life when shock fades quickly, and then there are moments that don't fade at all, they just sink deeper. That afternoon, only a few hours after the call about the arrest, there was a knock at my door. I didn't need to look through the window, I already knew. Maria Santos stood on my porch, folder tucked tightly under her arm. Her face was professional, but not cold. The kind of expression people wear when they've delivered this kind of news before and know it never lands gently. Mrs. Sullivan, she said softly, may I come in? I nodded and stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten alone that morning, the same one where reality had already cracked open once that day. She placed the folder down carefully. There's something else you need to know. I folded my hands together to stop them from shaking. I'm listening, Maria inhaled just once. They've formally relinquished their parental rights. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. They what? I asked. She didn't soften it. They signed the papers this morning. Both of them, Tyler and K.H. Lowe, are now wards of the state. The room went very still. No ringing in my ears, no dramatic reaction. Just a heavy, crushing silence. They didn't fight it, I asked quietly. They didn't ask about visitation, Maria shook her head. No appeals, no questions, no requests for contact. They signed and moved on. Like children were leases you could terminate, like responsibility had an expiration date. My hands started shaking anyway. I pressed them flat against the table. They didn't even ask if the kids were okay, I whispered. No, she said gently, they didn't. That was the moment my heart broke cleanly in two, not because David was gone, not because Jessica was gone, but because my grandchildren had just been abandoned, officially, legally, and without hesitation. Maria continued, choosing her words carefully. The state prefers family placement whenever possible. As their grandmother, you would have first consideration for custody, if you're willing. The irony nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. 3 months ago, they tried to dump the kids on my porch while fleeing the state. Now they were behind bars, and the state was asking if I'd step in properly, legally, permanently, without escape. After Maria left, I sat alone for a long time. No TV, no phone, just me and the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I thought about what custody really meant. Doctor's appointments, school meetings, homework, trauma. Questions I couldn't answer. I also thought about something else, something people don't like to admit out loud. If I said yes, I wasn't saving those kids. I was acknowledging that their parents were gone, not temporarily. Not metaphorically, gone. That evening I made one call, the foster family, the Morrisons. They answered on the second ring. Mrs. Sullivan, Mrs. Morrison said warmly, the kids talk about you all the time. I visited that weekend. I was nervous driving over, terrified of what I might find. What I saw broke my heart and healed it at the same time. K.H. Lowe ran across the living room the moment she saw me. Grandma Maggie, she cried, wrapping her arms around me so tightly it hurt. Her voice was lighter, brighter. She pulled back and whispered, it's quiet here, not scary quiet, peaceful quiet. Tyler didn't run, he walked. But his shoulders weren't hunched the way they used to be. He looked settled. Later, while K.H. Lowe played, Tyler sat beside me. No one yells about money here, he said calmly. That sentence did something to me. Children don't describe safety in abstract terms. They describe it in absence. No yelling, no fear, no chaos. That's when I understood something painful and freeing at the same time. Those kids weren't losing their parents. They had already lost them, long before the arrest, long before the court, long before the signatures. That night I cried, not because I regretted anything, but because grief doesn't care whether you made the right choice. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for children is refuse to cover for the adults who failed them. And just when I thought the damage had been fully exposed, I learned how deep the betrayal really went. I thought I had reached the bottom. I thought the arrests, the abandonment, the paperwork, all of it had already shown me the worst of what my son was capable of. I was wrong. A week after Maria's visit, my phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't gentle, it was precise. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Detective Rodriguez with Financial Crimes. We need to speak with you in person. There are certain tones you never forget. This was one of them. She arrived that afternoon with a file so thick she had to set it on the table with both hands. It landed with a dull thud, the sound of weight of evidence of years. She didn't open it right away. She looked at me first. I need to be very clear before we continue, she said. What I'm about to tell you is difficult, and it involves your son in ways that go beyond what you've already been told. I nodded. At that point, I thought I was numb. I wasn't. Your son wasn't a small-time thief, she said evenly. He was part of an organized interstate theft ring. The words didn't register all at once. Organized, ring, interstate. She opened the folder, photographs, flow charts. Bank records, this operation ran for nearly 5 years, she continued. Construction equipment, heavy machinery, millions of dollars in losses across multiple states. 5 years, while I worried about his stress, while I paid his bills. While I defended him, she flipped a page. Fake shell companies, altered serial numbers, falsified transport permits, offshore accounts used to launder proceeds. My hands went cold. Then she said the sentence that split whatever was left of my heart. David is claiming you were involved. I let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that surprises even you. I'm sorry, what? He's stating that you were aware the money you provided funded illegal activity, she said. That you encouraged him, that you knew. There it was, the final betrayal. When cornered, he didn't protect me. He offered me up. Like a shield, like collateral, like something expendable. I stood up slowly and walked to the counter. I needed the distance. You raised him, the detective added carefully. He's trying to suggest influence. I turned back toward the table and slid my phone across it. I have every receipt, I said calmly. Every transfer, every text, every voicemail. I opened my laptop. And I hired a private investigator months ago, after the conservatorship attempt. Her eyes flicked up. That report details offshore account attempts, shell company links, and communication timelines, I continued. None of which include me, she nodded once. We assumed as much, she said, but we'll need you to testify. That word hung in the air. Testify against my own son. I didn't hesitate. I will, I said. That evening, Tyler came into the living room quietly. He stood there longer than usual before speaking. Mom, Maggie? He asked softly. Yes, sweetheart. There's something I need to tell you. He swallowed hard. Last summer, I heard Dad talking on the phone about stealing equipment. He said the numbers would be changed. Mom told me never to repeat it. My heart broke in a way I didn't know was still possible. I pulled him into my arms immediately. You did nothing wrong, I said firmly. Nothing, do you hear me? He nodded, eyes wet. At 13 years old, my grandson had carried a secret no child should ever have to hold. And he carried it with more integrity than his father ever showed. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of the court, but because I finally let go of the illusion I'd been protecting for years. The man my son became wasn't a mistake, it was a series of choices, and now those choices had consequences. Federal consequences. This wasn't family court anymore. This wasn't manipulation or guilt or pressure. This was evidence. Paper trails, witnesses, truth, and in federal court, truth doesn't bend for tears. It doesn't care who you are to someone. It only cares what you did. And now it was time to tell it all under oath in a courtroom where lies don't survive paperwork. Let me say this plainly, without drama, without exaggeration. There is nothing more surreal than testifying against your own child. Nothing, not the arrest, not the handcuffs, not even the orange jumpsuit. It's standing in a federal courtroom, surrounded by marble and silence, realizing that the boy you once rocked to sleep is now a defendant, and the truth is your only obligation. The federal courthouse felt different from every other building I'd stepped into during this nightmare. Cold marble floors, echoing hallways, flags standing perfectly still. No chaos, no shouting, just consequences. I walked into that courtroom holding my grandson Tyler's hand. He was 14 now, taller, broader shoulders, eyes that had seen too much too early, but his grip was steady, braver than any child should ever have to be. David sat at the defense table, orange jumpsuit, hands folded, not the confident man who laughed when his daughter humiliated me in public. This version of him looked smaller, sunken eyes, jaw clenched tight, still angry. Still convinced he was the victim. When our eyes met, I searched for something: guilt, regret, shame. I found none, just calculation. That's when it hit me with terrifying clarity. This man would burn anyone to save himself, even me. Even his own children. The prosecutor stood. Her voice was calm, precise. "Mrs. Sullivan, did you knowingly fund criminal activity?" "No." Simple, direct, true. "Did your son ever tell you the money you provided was being used to purchase stolen equipment?" "Never." "Why did you stop making mortgage payments to your son?" I didn't hesitate. "Because I discovered the money was not being used as promised." A murmur moved through the courtroom. The truth has a sound. Then David's attorney stood. "Here we go." She approached slowly, confident, practiced. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, "isn't it true you enjoyed controlling your son financially?" I smiled, not sarcastic, not defensive, calm. "No," I replied evenly. "I enjoyed believing my son was honest." "Those are very different things." The jury reacted immediately. She tried again, suggested I was bitter, lonely, vindictive, implied this was revenge disguised as morality. I let her talk. Because people who rely on manipulation always overplay their hand. When she finished, I reached into my bag. "Your Honor," I said steadily, "may I submit Exhibit 47? Her face changed, not panic, but concern. Inside that exhibit was the private investigator's report. Meticulous, unforgiving, storage unit rentals, unexplained cash withdrawals, shell companies tied to altered serial numbers, timelines that aligned perfectly with my financial support. "I stopped payments," I said clearly, "because I learned I was being lied to, not because my feelings were hurt." You could feel the shift. The jury leaned forward. Pens stopped moving. David didn't look at me. For the first time, he looked panicked. The prosecutor nodded once, and then she said the words that made my chest tighten. "The government calls Tyler Sullivan to the stand." My grandson stood, and the room held its breath. There are moments when a courtroom feels less like a place of law and more like a place of reckoning. This was one of them. Tyler walked to the witness stand slowly, not because he was scared, but because he understood the weight of where he was. 14 years old, should have been worried about school dances, video games, whether his shoes were cool enough. Instead, he was about to testify against his own father. The bailiff helped him with the chair. The microphone was adjusted. Tyler's feet didn't quite touch the floor. I felt my chest tighten, not fear, pride mixed with grief. The prosecutor softened her voice immediately. "Tyler, can you tell the court your age?" 14. "And do you understand the importance of telling the truth here today?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice shook just a little. Then it steadied. "That's what courage looks like in real time." She began gently. "Tyler, can you describe what you heard at home last year?" Tyler took a breath. "I heard my dad talking on the phone a lot, late at night. He'd lower his voice when I came near." The courtroom was silent. "He talked about equipment, big machines. He said numbers had to be changed before inspections." A murmur rippled through the gallery. "Do you know what numbers he meant?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Tyler said, "serial numbers." I felt my throat close. 14, and he knew exactly what that meant. "He also talked about moving equipment before anyone noticed," Tyler continued, "and about paperwork not matching." The prosecutor nodded. "Who was he talking to?" "Different men. They'd come over late. Sometimes they'd meet in the garage." She paused. "Did any of this feel normal to you?" Tyler shook his head. "No, normal jobs don't hide things." That sentence landed like a hammer. No drama, no anger, just truth. Then came the question I knew was coming, the one that would either break him or free him. "Did you try to tell anyone what you heard?" "Yes." "Who?" "My mom." The courtroom held its breath. "What did she say?" Tyler swallowed. "She told me to forget it. She said it wasn't my business, and she told me never to repeat it." The silence that followed was suffocating. David stared straight ahead, didn't blink, didn't move. The jury didn't miss it, neither did the judge. The defense attorney stood quickly. "Tyler," she said, forcing a smile, "you're very young. How do you know you understood these conversations correctly?" Tyler looked at her, really looked. "Because they were whispering," he said calmly. "And because people doing normal work don't whisper." She tried again. "Isn't it possible you misunderstood what was being said?" Tyler didn't hesitate. "No. Why are you so sure?" He answered without emotion, and that's what made it devastating. "Because they were scared of being caught." That was it. That was the moment. The defense attorney glanced at the judge. No more questions. Tyler stepped down from the stand, his shoulders finally slumping just a little. I caught his eye as he passed. I didn't nod, I didn't smile. I just mouthed the words, "You did good." He sat beside me, hands clasped tightly together. David never looked at him, not once. And in that absence of eye contact, the courtroom learned something else. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice repeated, hidden, and protected by adults. The prosecutor rose again. "Your Honor," she said, "the government rests pending one final witness." My heart dropped. "One final witness?" I looked at Sarah in the gallery. She nodded once. That's when I realized what was coming, because the truth had already spoken. Now it was time for the lie to be exposed. And when that final witness took the stand, everything David tried to pin on me collapsed under its own weight. By late afternoon, the courtroom felt different, not tense, resolved. Like everyone in the room could sense that the truth had already won, it just hadn't finished speaking yet. The prosecutor stood one final time. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "the government calls Detective Walsh of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department." A woman in a dark suit took the stand. Calm, precise, the kind of person who doesn't speculate, she documents. She was sworn in. The prosecutor didn't waste time. "Detective, were you present at the time of the defendant's arrest?" "Yes." "Can you tell the court what the defendant said when questioned about the stolen equipment?" Detective Walsh didn't soften her tone. "He claimed the equipment belonged to his mother." The reaction was instant, a gasp from the gallery, a sharp intake of breath from the jury. I didn't move. I had already lived this betrayal. Hearing it out loud just confirmed what I knew. "He stated that Mrs. Sullivan financed the operation," the detective continued, "and that she intended to sell the machinery through third parties." My heart pounded not with fear but fury. This wasn't self-preservation. This was attempted sacrifice. The prosecutor paused. "And did your investigation find any evidence supporting that claim?" Detective Walsh didn't even glance at her notes. "No," clear, final. "Mrs. Sullivan was in her hometown at the time in question, with verified witnesses. There were no financial transfers linked to the thefts, no communications, and no physical connection between her and the equipment." The jury shifted. David's shoulders collapsed inward. "And based on your professional opinion?" the prosecutor asked. "The claim was false," Detective Walsh said, "an attempt to redirect blame." That's when David finally lowered his head, not in remorse. In exposure, because in that moment everyone understood something crucial. He hadn't just stolen. He hadn't just lied. He had tried to frame his own mother. The defense didn't cross-examine. There was nothing left to ask. The judge dismissed the jury for the evening. As people filed out, I stayed seated. My legs felt weak, not from stress, but release. That night, alone in my hotel room, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. No TV, no phone. Just silence, and something unexpected settled over me. Not grief, relief, because for the first time in years, I wasn't questioning my memory. I wasn't replaying conversations, wondering if I misunderstood. The truth was louder than his lies now. The next morning, the verdict came quickly, guilty on all counts. The courtroom didn't react dramatically. No cheers, no gasps, just acknowledgement, because the evidence had never been in doubt. Then came sentencing. Even the prosecutors looked surprised. The judge spoke calmly, deliberately. She cited lack of remorse, attempted obstruction, false accusations, exploitation of family. She looked directly at David. "You didn't just commit crimes," she said. "You attempted to weaponize your own mother and child to escape accountability." Sentence imposed. Federal time longer than anyone expected. When the gavel fell, David finally looked at me. Not angry, not sad, empty. And in that emptiness, I felt something close to peace, because love doesn't mean silence. And motherhood doesn't mean immunity from truth. Outside the courthouse, Tyler squeezed my hand. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. "For today," I said, but I knew something else too. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the end of the lie. And what came next, rebuilding, healing, and choosing a future without guilt, was harder than any courtroom battle. Let me tell you this straight, I have waited on report cards. I have waited on medical results. I have waited on death certificates. But nothing prepares you for waiting on a jury. The jury left the courtroom at exactly 10:17 a.m. 12 strangers, one heavy wooden door, and my entire family's future suspended in the space between breaths. The courtroom emptied slowly after they filed out. People whispered, lawyers gathered papers they already knew by heart. The judge stepped away, and suddenly there was nothing left to do. No more evidence, no more arguments, no more words, just waiting. Tyler sat beside me, his knee bouncing nervously at first, then still. He reached for my hand and squeezed it tighter than I expected. "Mom, Maggie," he said quietly, "whatever happens, I'm glad I told the truth." I turned to look at him. 14 years old, a child who had been forced into adult decisions because adults had failed him. That alone, I told him softly, made everything worth it. And I meant it. The first hour crawled. The second felt heavier than the first. By the third, time stopped behaving normally. Every sound felt amplified: footsteps in the hall, a door closing somewhere down the corridor, the hum of the building itself. 4 hours passed. It felt like 4 years. At 2:31 p.m., the bailiff stepped back into the courtroom. "We have a verdict." My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I could hear it in my ears. Not metaphorically, physically. Everyone stood. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked directly ahead, resolute. David sat at the defense table. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look afraid. He looked irritated, like this was an inconvenience he expected to survive. That was the last illusion I ever had about him. The judge took the bench. The clerk stood. "On count one," she said clearly, "we find the defendant guilty." No reaction from David. On count 2, guilty, Jessica let out a sharp sob. On count 3, guilty, the air felt thick. On count 4, guilty. All counts, no mercy, no ambiguity, no escape. The courtroom didn't erupt, there was no drama. Just the quiet, irreversible sound of accountability landing. The judge looked directly at David. Her voice was steady, not angry, not emotional. "You did not make a single poor decision," she said. "You made a lifestyle out of crime." She cited the evidence, the planning, the duration, the lack of remorse, and then she delivered the sentence. 15 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility for 8. Jessica's sentence followed. 12 years, the judge paused, then she added something I will never forget. "Your attempt to implicate your innocent mother demonstrates a complete absence of remorse." That line didn't feel like justice. It felt like truth finally being spoken out loud. I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I closed my eyes, because no mother dreams of seeing her child led away in shackles. No parent imagines this ending. But some children leave you no other outcome. As the courtroom cleared, Tyler stayed close to my side. He didn't ask questions, he didn't cry, he just held my hand. And in that moment, I understood something painful and freeing at the same time. I didn't fail as a mother because my son became a criminal. I succeeded as a guardian because I refused to lie for him. As we walked out of the courthouse into the cold air, the world didn't feel victorious. It felt quiet, still, like a chapter had closed, not gently, but permanently. And just when I thought the story was finally over, the truth about the money surfaced, money nobody knew existed. Just when I thought there were no more surprises left, when the verdict had landed, the sentences were set, and the dust finally seemed to be settling, the phone rang again. 3 weeks after sentencing, different courthouse, different office, different kind of truth. "Mrs. Sullivan," the man said, voice calm and measured, "this is Marcus Webb. I'm an attorney appointed to handle the financial recovery portion of your son's case." That alone told me this wasn't going to be simple. "I need you to come in," he added. "We found something." Those words never mean good news. I sat across from Marcus in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and paper, legal pads stacked neatly, a laptop already open. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your son wasn't just stealing equipment," he said. "He was running layered financial crimes." Layered, that word stayed with me. Insurance fraud, identity theft, investment scams. Ponzi-style operations targeting elderly victims. My stomach tightened. Then he looked at me directly. "And he used your identity." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I'm sorry," I said. "He forged your signature," Marcus continued. "Opened accounts in your name, used your credit history to appear legitimate. Investors trusted him because your name was attached." I stared at the table. All those years I thought I was helping my son stay afloat. He was using my reputation as a shield. "As of now," Marcus said carefully, "we've confirmed over $4 million stolen from victims, most of them elderly." My hands started shaking. "Not from fear, from rage. These were people like me," I whispered. "People who thought they were helping family or securing their future." Marcus nodded. "That's why I needed to see you personally." "Because there's more." He closed the laptop. "Your son hid money, a lot of it, offshore accounts, crypto wallets, shell corporations layered through shell corporations, money intended for after prison." "After tracing and seizure," Marcus said, "we've identified approximately $1.8 million that can be recovered." The room went silent. "And because your identity was used," he added, "you are legally classified as a primary victim of the fraud." I looked up. "What does that mean?" He didn't flinch. "It means you can claim the recovered funds." Silence filled the room. I thought about Tyler, KH low, college tuition, therapy, stability. I thought about the victims who would never see retirement the way they planned. I thought about the irony, money stolen in my name being returned to me. "I want half placed in protected trusts for my grandchildren," I said finally. "For education, counseling, and long-term stability." Marcus nodded slowly. "And the rest, returned to the victims," I said without hesitation. "Every dollar possible." Marcus smiled, not professionally, personally. "That," he said, "is the right answer." The paperwork took weeks, forms, statements, affidavits. Each signature felt heavier than the last because money doesn't erase trauma, it doesn't undo betrayal. But it can repair damage when used with intention. When the first checks went out to victims, I cried, not because of relief, because accountability had finally reached full circle. My son stole from the vulnerable. And through the law, not revenge, restitution was made. Here's the truth people don't like to hear. Money is never the real victory. Power is. And power used correctly restores what lies destroyed. The $900,000 placed into trusts for Tyler and KH Lowe wasn't an inheritance. It was insulation against chaos, against instability, against repeating history. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, not empty, peaceful. And I realized something important. I had spent years thinking my greatest fear was losing my son. I was wrong. My greatest fear had been becoming complicit in his damage, and now that fear was gone, but the real transformation didn't come from courtrooms or money. It came quietly in a house filled with backpacks, piano music, and children who finally felt safe. People think the end of a story like mine is a courtroom, a verdict, a sentence, a number of years handed down like a period at the end of a sentence. They're wrong. The real ending, the one that actually matters, happens quietly. It happens in kitchens, in hallways, in the spaces where broken families decide whether they'll stay broken or become something new. Custody was finalized that winter. No cameras, no speeches, just signatures and sealed envelopes. Tyler took the big bedroom, the one with the wide window and the old oak desk. He pretended not to care, but I caught him measuring the walls for posters when he thought I wasn't looking. K.H. Lowe chose the sunny room at the end of the hall, the one where the light spills in every morning like it's intentional. The house came alive in ways I hadn't felt in years, backpacks by the door, shoes kicked off without apology. Homework spread across the kitchen table like organized chaos, piano music in the evenings, arguments over cereal brands, laughter, the kind that doesn't check over its shoulder, not forced, not careful, real. There were hard moments, too. Nightmares, sudden tears over small things, questions I couldn't always answer, but there was also safety, and children heal faster than adults when they finally feel it. Christmas morning came quietly, no extended family, no pretending. Just the three of us. K.H. Lowe sat cross-legged on the floor, tearing paper with joyful abandon. Tyler opened his gifts carefully, methodically, like he didn't quite trust good things yet. At one point, K.H. Lowe looked up at me. "Really looked, Grandma Maggie?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," she hesitated, the way children do when they're about to ask something that feels big. "Can we call you Mom?" The room went still. Tyler didn't say anything. He just nodded. "It just feels right," he said. I felt my throat close. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood the weight of what they were offering me. Children don't give that title lightly. It's not about biology, it's about safety, about who shows up, about who stays. "I would be honored," I said, my voice barely holding together. K.H. Lowe smiled so wide it hurt to look at her. That night after they were asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The tree lights glowed softly, the house breathed, and I realized something that changed how I saw everything that came before. I didn't lose a family, I saved one. Not the one I started with, but the one that needed me most. People ask if I feel guilty, if I feel responsible, if I ever wish I'd handled things differently. Here's the truth: I grieve the son I thought I had. I do not grieve the choices he made, and I refuse to apologize for protecting children who deserved better. Love doesn't mean shielding someone from consequences. Love means refusing to lie when the truth matters more. Tyler started thriving, grades up, shoulders relaxed, laughing without permission. K.H. Lowe stopped flinching at raised voices, started sleeping through the night, started believing that home could be permanent, and me. I stopped carrying shame that was never mine to begin with. The house didn't just fill with noise, it filled with purpose. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing something that should have been protected all along. Backhand index pointing right, but here's the thing people don't talk about enough. Prison sentences end, time passes, and people like David don't let go quietly. What came next tested me in a way no courtroom ever could, because forgiveness is optional, but boundaries are not. Let me tell you something nobody warns you about: prison doesn't always break people. Sometimes it sharpens them. The first letter arrived in February, no return address, no prison stamp on the front, just my name. Written in David's handwriting. I stood at the kitchen counter holding that envelope for a full minute without opening it. The house was quiet. Tyler was at school. K.H. Lowe was coloring at the table, humming to herself, normal life. And that envelope felt like a crack in the wall holding it together. I already knew something important before I ever tore it open. If there was an apology inside, I would have felt it. There wasn't. I sat down, slid my finger under the seal, and unfolded the pages. 3 of them, tight handwriting, no margin space, no pauses, the kind of writing that comes from a mind that's been rehearsing its anger. He didn't ask how the kids were. He didn't ask if I was well. He didn't acknowledge the sentence, the victims, or the evidence. Instead, he blamed. The judge was corrupt. The jury was biased. The prosecutors were out to make an example. And then, finally, he got to me. "If you hadn't cut me off, none of this would have happened," he wrote. "You destroyed my family, not his choices, not the crimes. Not the lies, the theft, the fraud, or the attempt to frame me. That's when something cold settled in my chest, because this wasn't denial anymore. This was entitlement hardened into belief. David wasn't reflecting. He wasn't learning. He was rewriting the story in a way that made him the victim and me the villain, and that's dangerous." I folded the letter carefully, not shaking, not emotional, methodical. I walked to my office, opened a drawer, and placed it into a folder I labeled in thick black marker. Documentation. Then I locked the drawer. Because when someone shows you they're still blaming you from a prison cell, you don't argue. You prepare. Here's something people don't understand about incarceration. Time doesn't always bring clarity. Sometimes it brings obsession. I thought about all the moments David had refused accountability before: the dinner, the laughter, the threats, the courtroom. And I realized something uncomfortable but necessary. Prison hadn't changed him, it had focused him. That night, after the kids were asleep, I reread the letter one more time, not to analyze the words, but to listen to the tone. No remorse, no insight, no acceptance, just grievance. And grievance left unchecked becomes motive. I didn't tell Tyler or K.H. Lowe. They deserved peace, not fear, but I started sleeping lighter, locking doors twice. Not because I expected something immediate, but because my instincts, sharpened by months of truth, were no longer whispering. They were warning. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived, same handwriting. And before I even opened it, I knew this wasn't over, because the next letter didn't explain anything. It didn't justify, it threatened. The second letter arrived exactly 14 days after the first, same size envelope. Same handwriting, different energy. I knew it the moment I picked it up. This one didn't feel like anger trying to justify itself. It felt condensed, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away. I didn't open it right away. I carried it into my study, closed the door, and sat down at the desk where I now kept everything important: legal files, copies of court orders, the quiet infrastructure of safety. Only then did I open it, one page. No greeting, no explanation, just a single sentence written hard enough to leave an imprint on the paper beneath it, circled twice in pen. Prison ends, blood doesn't. That was it. No signature, no context, no attempt to soften it. I stared at the words longer than I want to admit, not because I didn't understand what they meant, but because I understood them perfectly. This wasn't frustration. This wasn't venting. This was a message designed to sit in your body, to live there. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I folded the paper once, slowly, placed it back in the envelope, and did something far more important. I picked up the phone. Sarah Blackwood answered on the second ring. I read the sentence out loud. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a brief pause, not hesitation, but calculation. "We're filing for no contact orders," she said calmly. "Immediately, not tomorrow, not next week." Immediately, she laid it out with the same precision she'd used from the beginning: restraining orders, protective orders, formal filings with the court, then the prison system itself. "David and Jessica will be flagged," she said. "No letters. No calls, no third-party contact attempts. Nothing." I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Is this a real threat?" Sarah didn't sugarcoat it. "People who feel wronged and refuse responsibility can become dangerous," she said. "Especially as release gets closer." "How long do we have?" I asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. "Best case, 8 years," she said. "Worst case, 2 or 3 with good behavior. 2 years." I looked down the hall at Tyler's bedroom door, at K.H. Lowe's drawings taped crookedly to the fridge. 8 years sounds long until you realize how fast children grow, until you imagine graduations, driver's licenses, college applications, until you imagine someone counting down. That night, I didn't sleep the same way again. Not because I was afraid he'd show up tomorrow, but because my nervous system finally accepted what my heart had been slow to admit. David was not done. The next morning, I explained only what the kids needed to know. "Some people aren't allowed to contact us," I said gently, "and we're making sure that stays that way." Tyler watched my face carefully. "You're not scared," he said. "No," I told him honestly. "I'm prepared. There's a difference. Fear freezes you. Preparation steadies you. That letter didn't make me feel helpless. It made me decisive. Because here's the truth no one tells you loudly enough: you don't wait for danger to become obvious. You respond the moment it introduces itself, and that sentence, 'prison ends, blood doesn't,' was an introduction. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started building a future that didn't depend on anyone else's behavior. That night, after the second letter, I didn't sit in fear. I didn't pace. I didn't spiral. I didn't let my mind race ahead of itself. Instead, I went outside. The garden lights were on, soft and warm, casting long shadows across the yard. Tyler sat at the patio table helping K.H. Lowe with her math homework. He explained fractions with the seriousness of a teacher. She nodded like it was the most important lesson in the world. They were safe, right then, in that moment, and I understood something with complete clarity. I was done living reactively. I had spent years responding to emergencies, to manipulation, to guilt, to chaos other people created. That chapter was over. I was going to live proactively now, quietly, intelligently, without permission. I went back inside and opened my notebook, the one I now kept for planning, not documenting damage, and I made decisions, not emotional ones, strategic ones. Here's what I did, and I did it without drama, without announcements, without giving anyone the satisfaction of knowing my next move. First, I updated my will, not just the basics, the contingencies, guardians named. Backup guardians named, then backups for the backups, clear instructions, no ambiguity because clarity is protection. Next, I formalized the trust, not just money authority, education funds, medical authority, mental health provisions. Age based releases that required accountability, not just birthdays, no loopholes. Then I moved assets out of reach, out of impulse, out of anyone's future manipulation, protected structures, separate oversight, layered security. I didn't hide money, I secured it. Then came the physical world. Security cameras, not obvious, not theatrical. Motion lights, upgraded locks, silent alarms, routine changes, different grocery days, different driving patterns. Different school pickup orders, not paranoia, pattern disruption. I notified the schools, photos, names, explicit instructions, no contact allowed, no exceptions, no family emergencies, doctors' offices too. Legal guardianship on file. Emergency protocols clarified. Paperwork matters more than promises. I didn't tell the kids everything. They didn't need fear. They needed stability. Tyler noticed first. Mom Maggie, he said one evening, watching me double check the door, are we in danger? I knelt in front of him so we were eye level. No, sweetheart, I said calmly. We're just being smart. That answer mattered. Because fear makes kids feel small. Preparation makes them feel safe. K.H. Lowe wrapped her arms around my neck that night. You're like a superhero, Grandma, she whispered. I smiled, not because it was cute, but because she felt protected enough to joke. And here's the truth people misunderstand. Boundaries are not punishment, they're protection. Preparation isn't pessimism, it's responsibility. I didn't do all this because I believed David would show up tomorrow. I did it because I refused to let his future behavior dictate our present peace. And something unexpected happened once everything was in place. I slept. Not lightly, not restlessly, deeply, because safety isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of structure. David thought prison was the end of this story. He thought time would soften things, that distance would dull the truth. What he didn't realize was this: the very thing he tried to use to control me, fear, forced me to build something unshakable. A future where my grandchildren would never again depend on someone else's instability. A future that didn't require forgiveness to function. A future that was locked in legally and emotionally. And the irony, the systems I built to protect us were going to outlast his sentence. Because the thing he did to try to hurt me, the threats, the pressure, the obsession, ended up securing my grandchildren's future permanently. And that was a victory no courtroom could ever give. Let me tell you something people don't talk about enough. Karma doesn't rush. It doesn't explode on schedule or announce itself with drama. It stacks receipts. Quietly, patiently, relentlessly. It was a Tuesday morning, pancake day. The good kind of ordinary. Tyler was halfway out the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, reminding me he had a history quiz. K.H. Lowe was sitting on the kitchen floor arguing with the cat about whose turn it was to use the sunbeam near the window. Normal life, the kind I had fought so hard to protect. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Something in my chest tightened. I answered. Mrs. Sullivan, a familiar voice said, "This is Detective Rodriguez." That alone told me this wasn't small. Detective Rodriguez never called unless the ground was about to shift. We've uncovered additional financial activity connected to David, she continued. I didn't ask what kind. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same place where so many truths had landed over the past year. I'm listening, I said. There was a pause, not hesitation. Wait, your son wasn't just hiding money, she said carefully. He was laundering it using your identity. Boom. Again, it shouldn't have surprised me, and yet it still hurt. Fake businesses registered in my name, forged signatures, bank accounts I had never opened, digital wallets I had never touched. All built on the assumption that I would never look closely. He assumed you wouldn't question it, the detective added. That line landed harder than the rest, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. For years, I hadn't wanted to see. I had trusted where scrutiny was required. He left behind approximately $1.8 million in concealed assets, she continued. Funds that were never recovered during sentencing, hidden, untouched, waiting. I stared at the wall across from me, the one covered in K.H. Lowe's drawings and Tyler's school certificates, and felt something click into place. My son hadn't just been planning crimes, he had been planning after, a post-prison life. Funded by stolen money, carried in my name. As an identity theft victim, Detective Rodriguez said, you are legally entitled to pursue restitution and damages from those assets. For a moment, the room felt very still. I thought about all the years I'd been told to let things go, to be the bigger person, to keep the peace. And suddenly, the choice in front of me wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility, because that money wasn't neutral. If I walked away, it would sit in limbo. If I acted, it could become something else, something clean, something corrective, something that didn't belong to David anymore, not in spirit, not in consequence. Thank you, I said finally. Tell me what the next step is. When I hung up, Tyler was standing in the doorway watching me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said honestly. "Everything just changed." I didn't explain yet. Kids don't need every detail, they need stability. But inside, I felt something shift, not fear, not anger, finality, because my son had made one last mistake. He thought stealing from me meant control. What he never understood was this: when you steal someone's name, you give them legal power you can never take back. And what I chose to do with that power would decide how the rest of the story was written. When people hear the words hidden money, they imagine temptation. They imagine revenge, luxury, escape. I won't lie, the thought crossed my mind for exactly 3 seconds, because money doesn't reveal who you are when you're broke. It reveals who you are when you finally have options. I sat across from attorney Marcus Webb again, the same calm conference room, the same neat stack of files, but this time the energy was different. This wasn't about damage control. This was about choice. Marcus didn't dramatize it. "If you file the claim," he said evenly, "you can legally recover the majority of the seized funds." "How much?" I asked. He slid a document across the table. "Approximately $1.8 million. Money my son had hidden for the life he believed he'd resume after prison. Money he never intended to earn honestly. Money built on lies, exploitation, and stolen trust." I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since all of this began, I felt something close to control. Not power, clarity. I thought about revenge, about taking it all and disappearing somewhere quiet and warm, no courtrooms, no paperwork, no ghosts. I thought about comfort, then I thought about Tyler, college applications coming sooner than he realized, the therapy bills that never showed up on Instagram, the cost of stability no one talks about. I thought about KH Low. Dance classes, art supplies, a childhood where home meant safety, not unpredictability. And then I thought about the people my son had hurt, elderly men and women who trusted him because my name made him look legitimate. People who lost retirement savings they would never have time to rebuild. That's when the decision became simple. "I want half placed into irrevocable trusts for my grandchildren," I said. Marcus didn't interrupt. "Education, counseling, housing, stability, whatever they need to grow without fear." He nodded and wrote. "And the rest?" he asked. "Return to the victims," I said immediately, "especially the elderly ones." Marcus looked up at me then, not as a lawyer. "As a human being, that's justice," he said quietly. "The process took months, court approvals, victim verification, restitution frameworks, no shortcuts. When the final accounting came through, the numbers were precise. $900,000 into protected trusts for Tyler and KH Low. The remaining funds distributed to victims through court-supervised restitution. When the check arrived, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like responsibility. I didn't celebrate, I didn't announce it. I invested it carefully, deliberately, trust administrators, education plans, home improvements that made us safer, not flashier, security, peace. One night, Tyler found me reviewing paperwork at the kitchen table. He looked at the documents, then at me. "Is that Dad's money?" he asked quietly. I didn't dodge it. "It's money he stole," I said gently. "And now it's being used to fix what he broke." Tyler thought about that for a moment. Then KH Low, coloring nearby, looked up and smiled. "Then it's good money now," she said. "Smart kid. Here's something people misunderstand. Money isn't clean or dirty on its own. Intent makes it so, and intent can be corrected. What mattered wasn't that I took the money. What mattered was where it went. That money would never fund manipulation again. It would never buy silence. It would never protect wrongdoing. It would build something instead." And just when I thought that was the end of it, David found out. And the moment he realized where his hidden fortune had gone was the moment he finally understood what he had truly lost. The call came 2 weeks later, not to me. That part mattered, because for the first time in his life, David didn't get direct access. He didn't get my voice. He didn't get my reaction. He didn't get the satisfaction. The call went to Sarah Blackwood. She told me about it afterward, calmly, professionally, but I could hear it anyway, like an echo traveling backward through time. David had been furious, not sad, not reflective, not remorseful, furious. The moment he learned where the money went, something inside him finally collapsed. He screamed, not raised voice frustration, screaming. He accused me of theft, of betrayal, of manipulation. He claimed the money was his future, that I had ruined his second chance. Sarah let him talk. That's what experienced lawyers do when someone is unraveling. They let the record form itself. Then he threatened lawsuits, appeals, civil actions, anything that sounded powerful enough to scare someone who didn't understand the law. Sarah waited, and then she said one sentence. "Mr. Sullivan forfeited those assets the moment he committed identity theft." That was it. No argument, no debate, end of discussion. The judge reinforced it days later in writing, clear, blunt, unappealable, assets seized under criminal forfeiture, restitution properly allocated, claims denied. David had no legal ground, no leverage, no future payday waiting for him on the outside. That was the moment it finally hit him. He wasn't getting out rich, he wasn't reclaiming control. He wasn't the mastermind he believed himself to be. He was just a criminal who had burned every bridge and then watched the ashes get used to build something better without him. Sarah told me his voice changed when he realized it. Not anger anymore, panic, the kind that sets in when someone understands there is no longer a hidden door, no contingency plan, no safety net. And I felt something unexpected when I heard that, not joy, relief. Because closure doesn't come from revenge, it comes from certainty. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. No paperwork, no planning, just quiet. And for the first time since the very beginning of this story, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. The board had flipped, permanently. David could no longer hurt us financially. He could no longer manipulate through money. He could no longer promise himself a future funded by stolen names and stolen trust. And me, I wasn't the weak old woman he thought he could use. I wasn't the obstacle he believed he could intimidate. I was the firewall, between him and the children he nearly destroyed, between his past crimes and their future peace. Here's the part people misunderstand the most. Strength doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like quiet systems that don't require your presence anymore. The trusts didn't need me to argue. The courts didn't need me to explain. The paperwork spoke for itself, and once that happens, the threat loses oxygen. Tyler noticed the shift before I said anything. "You seem lighter," he said one evening while we washed dishes together. "I am," I told him honestly. K.H. Lowe climbed onto a chair and wrapped her arms around my waist. "We're safe now, right?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head. "Yes," I said, "we are, because safety isn't just locked doors and cameras. It's knowing that someone who once had power over you doesn't anymore." David thought control was money. He was wrong. Control is structure, and structure had replaced him. That was the moment he lost forever. Not when the sentence was handed down, not when the money was seized, but when he realized he was irrelevant to our future, and that was the consequence he never planned for. And now, with the chaos behind us, life finally had space to become something else, something quieter, something whole. The final chapter isn't about him, it's about healing. Let me tell you something real, something no one prepares you for. Peace feels strange when you've lived in chaos for too long. Not comforting at first, not relaxing, unfamiliar. The first few months after everything finally settled were quiet. No court dates circled on the calendar, no lawyers calling before breakfast, no emergency numbers lighting up my phone, no panic. Just days that passed without demanding anything from me, and at first that silence made me nervous. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for another letter, another call. Another problem I'd have to solve before anyone else got hurt. I slept lightly, not because I was afraid, but because my body hadn't caught up with reality yet. Chaos trains you to stay alert. Stillness feels suspicious when you're used to survival, but then something unexpected happened. Life started filling the space, not dramatically, not all at once, quietly, naturally. Tyler began studying for his college entrance exams at the kitchen table. The same table where his parents used to argue about money, voices raised, tempers frayed, tension thick enough to feel. Now, just notebooks, highlighters, focus. Sometimes he'd look up and ask a question. Sometimes he'd just sit there, steady and absorbed. K.H. Lowe practiced piano every evening, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She'd hit the same wrong note on purpose, glance over at me, and grin when I laughed. Joy without consequences, that was new. The house itself felt different, not because of renovations, not because of money, because of safety. The air wasn't heavy anymore, doors didn't slam, voices didn't drop suddenly when someone entered the room. Nothing felt like it could explode at any moment. One night, Tyler said something that stopped me cold. We were doing dishes together, a quiet, ordinary moment. He dried a plate carefully, then said, "Mom, Maggie, this is the first time our house doesn't feel like it could fall apart." I froze, not because I didn't understand, but because I did, completely. That was the moment it hit me. I didn't just remove danger, I built stability. And stability is something children remember forever, not the big gestures, not the speeches. The feeling of coming home and knowing the walls will still be standing tomorrow. I started noticing other things too. K.H. Lowe slept through the night consistently. Tyler laughed more, real laughter, not guarded. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, stopped bracing for disaster, and slowly, without ceremony, my nervous system unclenched. Here's something no one tells you: healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. I still thought about the past, about David, about the choices that led here, but those thoughts no longer controlled the room. They stayed where they belonged, behind me. For the first time in a long time, the future felt open, not risky, not fragile, just possible. And that's when I understood something that reframed everything. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of consistency. Of routines that don't break, of love that doesn't threaten, of boundaries that don't move. I hadn't erased the past, I had outgrown it, but peace always gets tested. And just when I thought the chapter was truly closed, the past knocked one last time. It came a year later, no warning, no build-up. Just another envelope mixed in with grocery coupons and school notices, ordinary mail carrying something that no longer belonged in my life. The return address told me everything before I touched it. Prison, different handwriting this time, softer, looser, almost careful. I stood at the counter for a moment, staring at it, surprised by my own reaction. I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry, I was curious. That alone told me how far I'd come. I opened it. The letter was short, measured, like someone trying on a new version of themselves in a mirror. "I've had a lot of time to think," David wrote. "I see things differently now. I'm ready to make things right. No accusations, no threats, no bitterness, just the language of reflection. The kind people use when they believe growth should be rewarded with access." I read it once. Then again, slowly, not looking for hidden insults this time, but for responsibility, ownership, anything resembling accountability. It wasn't there, there were no specifics, no acknowledgement of the victims, no mention of the children. No apology that named what he'd actually done, just the implication that time served should reopen doors. I folded the letter carefully, and then I did something that surprised even me. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't draft a reply in my head. I didn't feel the familiar pull to explain myself. I felt still. Clarity has a weightlessness to it. I placed the letter back in its envelope and set it aside, not in the documentation drawer. Not in a locked box, just on the desk, where things wait while you decide whether they deserve space in your life. That night I slept peacefully. The next morning I made coffee, packed lunches, and watched Tyler leave for school with a wave and a smile. Nothing shifted, and that's when I knew the answer. Later that week, I showed the letter to Sarah Blackwood. She read it once, then she nodded. "You don't owe him closure," she said simply. "No lecture, no legal analysis, just truth." "Forgiveness doesn't require access," she continued, "and healing doesn't require reopening wounds." She was right. There are moments when responding feels like strength, and moments when silence is the clearest boundary you can draw. This was the latter. I didn't throw the letter away. I didn't dramatize the decision. I just chose not to engage, because here's something people misunderstand about forgiveness. It's not about letting someone back into your life. It's about releasing yourself from the need to explain, justify, or relive what already cost you enough. I didn't respond out of anger. I responded, or rather, didn't respond, out of respect for the life I had built. For the children who finally felt safe. For the version of myself who no longer mistook endurance for love. That letter wasn't an invitation. It was a test, and I didn't need to take it. A few days later, K.H. Lowe found the envelope on my desk. She picked it up, then looked at me. "Mail from the past?" she asked innocently. "Yes," I said. "Do you have to answer it?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart." "I don't," she nodded like that made perfect sense, because to children raised in stability, boundaries don't feel cruel. They feel normal. I put the letter away that evening, not locked, not hidden. Just placed in a drawer I rarely open anymore. Because some endings don't need conversations. They need distance. They need time to keep moving forward. And that letter, it belonged to a life I no longer lived. The real ending didn't come with a response. It came with something quieter, something earned. The real ending didn't arrive with noise. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no dramatic final conversation. It came quietly, the way real healing always does. Last spring, Tyler got the email. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, phone in his hand, eyes scanning the screen again and again like he didn't trust it yet. "Mom, Maggie," he said slowly, "I think I got in." I dried my hands and walked over. "Got in where?" He turned the phone toward me. "Acceptance letter, full scholarship." I felt my knees weaken, not from shock, but from relief so deep it felt like gratitude. Tyler didn't jump, didn't shout, he just exhaled, like a child who'd been holding pressure in his chest for years and was finally allowed to set it down. K.H. Lowe screamed for both of us. She ran around the living room like we'd won the lottery, announcing to the cat, the couch, and the window that her brother was going to be a college man. We celebrated that night with takeout on the porch. No fancy restaurant, no speeches, just food balanced on our laps and laughter that didn't have to check itself. A few weeks later, K.H. Lowe stood on a small stage in a community hall, piano bench adjusted too high, feet dangling as she played. She hit every note clean. When she finished, the applause came fast and loud, first place. She ran straight into my arms afterward, breathless and glowing. "I didn't mess up once," she whispered. I hugged her tightly. "No," I said. "You didn't." As the sun set that evening, the three of us sat together outside, the air warm, the day winding down gently. K.H. Lowe leaned into my side, quiet for once. "Mom," she asked. "Yes, sweetheart, do you think bad things can lead to good lives?" I thought about it for a moment, not the easy answer, the honest one. Yes, I said finally, but only if someone is brave enough to stop the cycle. She nodded like she understood, not fully, not intellectually, but emotionally, the way children do. And in that moment, everything crystallized. This whole story, every painful step, wasn't about punishment. It was about interruption. I wasn't punished for saying no. I was rewarded for it. I didn't lose a family, I chose one. I chose to protect children instead of protecting appearances. I chose truth over comfort. I chose boundaries over guilt. I chose peace, even when it felt unfamiliar. And here's the truth I want anyone listening to hear clearly. If you've been labeled a burden for refusing to be used, if your love has been measured only by what you give, if you've been told that endurance is the same thing as loyalty, it's not. Sometimes the strongest love sounds like. Figure it out. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is stop rescuing the wrong person so the right ones can finally breathe. I don't wake up waiting for the past anymore. I wake up planning the future, college visits. Recitals, ordinary mornings filled with trust. That's the legacy I chose. Not money, not control, not silence, but safety. And safety, once built, echoes forward, long after the chaos fades, long after the letters stop coming, long after the story ends.